Get out of my life forever. The scream from her daughter-in-law tore through the family party's atmosphere. Sharp as a shard of glass, a wine glass was thrown onto the lawn. But what truly shattered was Joyce Campbell's heart. She stood there, amidst the pitying stares of strangers, searching for protection from her only son. But Ryan just stood frozen, his eyes a silent plea for her to disappear. This pain was more than humiliation. It was betrayal from the one person she loved most. If you have ever felt abandoned by your own family, let us know what city you're watching from. Subscribe to our channel, Deepu Khatter Stories. Hit the like button, and let's watch what a mother does when her love is trampled on. The Shattering. My name is Joyce Campbell. I am 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and until last night, I thought, a beloved grandmother. I have spent my life studying the beauty and endurance of art, yet I failed to see the cracks forming in the canvas of my own family. The party was Lauren's idea. Of course, everything in their lives was Lauren's idea. Our lives, I should say, their perfect, curated lives. The house was spotless. The garden looked like it had been arranged by a film crew, each blade of grass standing at attention. The guests, all Lauren's friends, were loud and shiny and smelled of expensive perfume. My son, Ryan, moved through the crowd with a smile that looked tired. I know my son's smiles. I've collected them my whole life. This one was a stranger. I had brought a key lime pie. My late husband, Walter, he used to say my key lime pie could solve international conflicts. The recipe was my mother and her mother's before that. It was more than just sugar and limes. It was a story, a legacy. One of the guests, a woman with diamonds in her ears that caught the afternoon sun, took a bite. Her eyes widened. "Lauren, you are a lucky woman," she said, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn. "Your mother-in-law makes the best pie I have ever tasted." A quiet fell over the small group around her. Lauren, holding a tall glass of white wine, turned. Her smile was a thin, perfect line, a piece of modern art, clean, sharp, and cold. "Oh, yes," she said. Her voice was as clear as glass. "Joyce has many traditional recipes, very nostalgic." The word hung in the air between us. Nostalgic, as if it were a disease. I felt a familiar stillness come over me, the kind you learn to wear like a coat when the air gets cold. I met her haze. "Traditional things last. Lauren," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It's because they're built on something real." It was the wrong thing to say. Or perhaps, it was the most honest thing I had said to her in years. And honesty, I've learned, can feel like an attack to those who live in fiction. Her face changed. The perfect mask cracked. It was just a flicker, but I saw it. The raw, unfiltered anger of a cornered animal. She threw her glass. It wasn't crystal, just expensive plastic. So it didn't shatter. It just landed. A dull thud on the perfect grass. Wine splashed onto the white roses Walter and I had planted years ago. "Real," she shrieked, and the sound ripped through the polite chatter of the party. "You always think you're better than me. I am so sick of trying to be good enough for you. Get out of my life forever." Silence. A complete, heavy silence. The kind that presses down on your ears. I saw 20 faces turn to me, some with pity, some with embarrassment. I looked for my son. He was frozen, standing by the grill. He took a step forward, then stopped. He looked from his wife to me, his face a mess of confusion. He finally walked over, not to her, but to me. He didn't take my hand. He didn't stand in front of me. He leaned in, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "Mom, please, Lauren's just stressed. Don't make it worse. Maybe you should go." That was the blow. Not the scream, not the thrown glass, but the whisper, the plea for me to disappear, so his life could remain neat. I didn't say a word. I looked at him. My son. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose heartbreaks I had mended. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't quite recognize him. I picked up my purse from the chair. I smoothed down the front of my dress. I walked away. I walked through the crowd of strangers. My back straight. My head high. It's what my mother taught me to do. It's the only thing I could do. I got into my car. I put the keys in the ignition but didn't turn them. I just sat there. In the quiet of my old sedan. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. These hands, they had baked that pie. They had held my son when he was a baby. They had held Walter's hand as he took his last breath. And as I sat there, the sounds of the party starting up again behind me. A low murmur of forced cheerfulness. I whispered it to myself in the empty car. Sometimes, the people you love the most are the ones holding the chisel and the hammer, chipping away at you, piece by piece, until all that's left is ruin. Echoes in the hallway. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic, or the turns I made. Muscle memory. I suppose, the same way your heart keeps beating even after it's been broken. I parked the car in the garage. The sound of the engine dying echoed in the sudden quiet. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. It's a sound you get used to when you live alone. The gentle groans of old wood. The hum of the refrigerator. It's the sound of a house breathing. Tonight, it sounded like a sigh. I walked through the entryway, my hand brushing against the cool, smooth wood of the banister. Walter and I bought this house 40 years ago. We raised Ryan in these rooms. Every scuff on the floorboards, every faded patch on the wallpaper, they were pages in our family's story. Now, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was accusing. It seemed to ask the question that was screaming in my own mind. How did we get here? I sank into Walter's old armchair, the worn leather cool against my skin, and I remembered. My mind, unbidden, drifted back 5 years, to the first time Ryan brought Lauren here for dinner. She was dazzling. That was the word for it. She walked into our home like she was walking onto a stage, her smile bright enough to light the entire room. She wore a simple white dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to. Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her. He looked enchanted, like a boy who had just seen magic for the first time. For that, I was prepared to love her. She was polite, of course, full of compliments. What a beautiful home. Joyce, she'd said, her eyes scanning everything. But her gaze didn't linger on the family photos lining the mantelpiece, or the worn spines of the books on the shelves. It lingered on the paintings, the small, modest collection Walter and I had gathered over a lifetime. Not famous works, but pieces that spoke to us. This one is lovely, she said, stopping in front of a small landscape by a local artist. Is it valuable? The question was so bald, so artless. I remember looking over at Walter. He had a quiet, thoughtful expression on his face. I smiled and told her the story behind the painting. About the rainy afternoon, we found it in a little gallery by the sea. Lauren listened, nodding. But her eyes had already moved on, assessing the next object, the next price tag. Later that night, after she and Ryan had left, Walter and I were cleaning up in the kitchen. He was quiet for a long time, drying a plate with slow, deliberate motions. Then he looked at me, his eyes full of a gentle concern that always made my heart ache. Be careful with people who only see the price of things, Joyce, he said softly. They often don't understand the value. Walter was a lawyer. He was trained to see the fine print, to see the potential for trouble hiding behind a pretty facade. I, on the other hand, was trained to see the potential for beauty. I saw a young woman who was ambitious, eager to build a life. I saw my son, happy, and I chose to believe in that. I dismissed Walter's warning as the overprotective caution of a father. A mistake. One of the great mistakes of my life? I told myself her focus on material things was just a generational difference. I told myself her need to present a perfect image to the world was just ambition. When she convinced Ryan they needed a newer, more expensive car because image is everything in his industry, I bit my tongue. I watched my son, a man who had always been so sensible, so grounded, start to stretch his finances thin, to build a life that looked good on paper, a life that looked good in Lauren's social media posts. I was fooling myself. I know that now. I wasn't just being an understanding mother-in-law. I was being a coward. I was calling her artificial nature ambition. I was calling my son's growing weakness devotion. I painted over the cracks, told myself it was just part of the pattern, until the whole thing shattered at my feet. Sitting there in the dark, in the quiet of my house, I could finally see the truth. This disaster wasn't born in a moment of anger at a garden party. It had been growing for years, nurtured by my silence, watered by my hope, and I had let it happen. The paper trail of lies. The next morning, the sun came up just like it always does. The world hadn't stopped. The birds still sang their songs outside my kitchen window. But inside my house, a quiet storm had settled. The shock from the party had worn off, leaving something cold and hard in its place. A resolve. A professor spends her life looking for facts, for the truth buried under layers of interpretation. And I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that I needed to find the facts of my own life. I walked into Walter's old study. It's a room I don't use much anymore. It still smells faintly of him, of old books and leather. His photograph sits on the desk, the one from our 30th anniversary. He's smiling, his eyes kind but sharp, the eyes of a lawyer who could see through any lie. I stood before the photograph for a long time. I won't let our legacy be destroyed by lies. My love, I whispered to the quiet room. And in that moment, the decision was made. I was no longer a victim. I was a researcher. I sat down at his desk, the old oak cool beneath my forearms. I didn't have to hack into anything. Years ago, when Ryan was just starting out, Walter had insisted I be listed as an emergency contact on some of their financial accounts, just in case. He had said, a lawyer's caution, a husband's foresight. I had never used it, until now. I logged into the shared portal for the main bank account. The screen blinked to life. A neat column of numbers. At first, it looked normal. A salary deposit from Ryan's architectural firm, mortgage payments, utility bills. But then I started to look closer. I clicked on the credit card statement, one after another. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of dollars spent at designer boutiques I had never heard of. Hundreds on dinners at restaurants with names I couldn't pronounce. It was a ledger of a life they couldn't possibly afford. Page after page of it. The minimum payments were barely being met. A cold feeling started in the pit of my stomach. I kept digging. I found the statements for those buy now, pay later services. A couch for $3,000. Paid in installments. A handbag for $2,000. A vacation to a place with white sand beaches. Broken down into 12 easy payments. It was a life built on credit. A house of cards. The final blow came in the form of an email notification. An overdue notice. It was from the private school my grandchildren attended. The tuition was 2 months behind. They were threatening to remove the children if the balance wasn't settled. I leaned back in Walter's chair, the leather groaning under my weight. I closed my eyes. The screen in front of me glowed with cold, hard numbers. The truth. This wasn't just poor money management. This was a desperate performance. A frantic attempt to keep up an illusion. And suddenly, Lauren's shriek at the party made a terrible kind of sense. It wasn't just the anger of a woman who felt judged. It was the desperate, cornered scream of someone drowning in their own secrets. Someone whose perfect world was about to collapse. And my little key lime pie, my offering of simple, honest love, had been the one thing too real for her world of fiction to bear. I sat there for a long time, in Walter's study, surrounded by his law books and the undeniable truth. I wonder, have you ever felt it, that little crack in a picture that looks perfect from a distance? That nagging feeling that something is wrong, but you choose to look away, because looking closer is just too painful. Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone is the first step toward finding your strength. The ghost in the calendar. The numbers on the screen were stark, cold. A story of a life lived on borrowed time and borrowed money. But as I sat there, in the deep quiet of Walter's study, a feeling crept over me. A cold thread of dread that told me this wasn't the whole story. The debt was a symptom, not the disease. The real sickness, the root of it all, was still hiding in the shadows. I don't know what made me do it. Perhaps it was just a tired click of the mouse. I was still logged into that shared family account Ryan had set up years ago, the one for emergencies. I opened the calendar application, intending to close it. But there it was. 2 calendars, layered over each other. One was blue, labeled Campbell Family. It was filled with soccer practices and dentist appointments. The other was a pale lavender. It was labeled L. Bishop. Lauren's personal calendar. She must have synced it by accident and forgotten. My heart began to beat a little faster. A slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Most of it was normal. Hair appointments. Lunches with friends whose names I recognized. But then I saw a recurring entry. Once or twice a week. For the past 6 months. Lunch with M.R. The entries were always at expensive downtown restaurants. Places Ryan and Lauren couldn't possibly afford. Sometimes, it wasn't a restaurant. It was a boutique hotel. The entry marked simply M.R. Meeting. My mind drew a blank. I scrolled through my memory of Lauren's friends. The shiny, smiling people from the party. Melissa, no. Rebecca, no. The initials just hung there on the screen. A mystery. A ghost in the machine. I scrolled back further. My finger trembling slightly on the mouse. 3 months ago, 4, 5. There he was. Consistent. Reliable. This wasn't new. This was a routine. A second life. Neatly scheduled between picking the children up from school and posting pictures of her perfect family online. I felt a wave of nausea. This was it. The disease, the reason for the desperate spending, the reason for the coldness in my son's eyes. But who was he? Who was M.R.? And then, a memory surfaced. A dark, painful memory I had pushed to the back of my mind for years. It was about 5 years ago. Ryan had come home, utterly broken. He was 28, full of ambition, and he had just lost everything. His first big architectural project, his savings, his confidence, all of it gone. He had been cheated, betrayed by his business partner, a man he trusted, a man whose name I hadn't allowed myself to think of since. My breath caught in my throat. Mark Renshaw. M.R. The room felt suddenly cold. I stared at the initials on the screen, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. No, it couldn't be. It was a coincidence. It had to be. My hands moved on their own, my fingers typing the name into the search bar. Mark Renshaw. His face appeared on the screen, older now, more polished, but the same smile, the same arrogant, confident smile from the photos Ryan had shown me all those years ago. The smile of the man who had nearly destroyed my son. And then, a second wave of memory hit me. So sharp it felt like a physical blow. A charity gala. Maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I was there with some friends from the museum. Lauren and Ryan were there too. I remembered seeing Lauren laughing with a handsome man in a dark suit by the bar. At the time, I had barely registered it. She was always networking, always charming someone. But now, seeing the picture on my screen, it was him. It was Mark Renshaw. The blood drained from my face. I felt an ice-cold clarity spread through my veins. This wasn't a simple, messy affair. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A calculated, cruel choice. She hadn't just betrayed her husband. She had allied herself with his enemy, the man who had taken his dreams and crushed them in his hand. All the pieces fell into place. The cruelty, the contempt, the mountain of debt. It wasn't just about a woman unhappy in her marriage. This was something else entirely. This was about destruction. A complete and utter destruction of my son. I leaned back in Walter's chair, the old leather groaning under my weight. The grief I had felt earlier was gone. The sadness had burned away, and in its place, something hard and cold and heavy had formed. It was rage. A quiet, patient rage. The kind a mother feels when she realizes her child is not just hurt, but in danger. I was no longer a victim of a family squabble. I was the protector of my son's life, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would not let this stand. The weight of legacy. After the storm of discovery comes a different kind of weather, a heavy, quiet stillness, the kind of quiet that follows a funeral, when the guests have all gone home, and you are left alone with the silence and the truth. That was the quiet that filled Walter's study. I spent hours there. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I simply sat in his old leather chair, the one that still holds the faint shape of him. And I breathed. The anger from the day before had burned itself out. leaving behind not ash, but a strange, cold clarity. I was no longer a mother reeling from betrayal. I was the keeper of a promise. My eyes fell upon the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. I knew what was in there. I had avoided it for years. Avoided it because looking at it felt like admitting that Walter, my practical, brilliant Walter, had seen this storm coming long before I had. With a deep breath, I pulled it open. There it was, a thick, navy blue binder with an embossed label on the spine, printed in gold leaf, the Walter and Joyce Campbell Family Trust. I lifted it from the drawer. It was heavy in my hand, heavier than paper. It felt like it was filled with the weight of years, of decisions made in quiet conversations over late-night cups of tea. I placed it on the polished oak of his desk. For a moment, I just looked at it. A covenant, a fortress made of paper and ink. I opened it. The paper was thick, almost like vellum. The first page was a summary, drafted by our lawyer. But the intention behind it was pure Walter. I could almost hear his voice in the room, calm and reasonable, the way it always was when he was explaining something important. I remember the day we signed it. Joyce? His voice echoed in my memory. We were in a stuffy downtown office. Ryan and Lauren had been married for 6 months. I thought it was just standard estate planning. But then Walter squeezed my hand under the table. He had a look in his eye, a look of quiet concern. Later that night, he had tried to explain it to me. It's not that I don't trust Ryan, he'd said, swirling the ice in his glass. I want to make sure the foundation of this family is solid rock, not shifting sand. This house, our legacy, it's for the generations to come, not for a lifestyle, not for show. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious, a lawyer's habit. Now, I saw it for what it was. It was love. It was the deepest, most protective form of love I had ever known. A love that planned for a storm even in the brightest sunshine. My fingers, trembling just slightly, turned the pages. They were filled with dense, legal language, words like beneficiary and trustee and fiduciary duty. But I wasn't looking for the complex clauses. I was looking for the heart of it, the part Walter had made sure was ironclad. And then I found it. Section C, Article 4. My breath caught in my throat. I traced the words with my finger, as if to make sure they were real. The sentence was clear, unambiguous. It had been written for a moment exactly like this one. My voice was a whisper in the silent room as I read it aloud. The primary residence shall remain the property of the trust in perpetuity. Occupancy is granted to the direct descendants and their legal spouses under the following conditions. I paused, my heart pounding against my ribs. The designated residents must maintain the property in good standing and uphold the family's standards of personal integrity and financial stability. In the event these conditions are severely breached, the acting trustee has the full and irrevocable authority to terminate the right of residency. I read it again, and a third time. The full and irrevocable authority. The words landed not with a sense of triumph, but with a crushing weight. This wasn't a loophole. This wasn't a lucky discovery. This was a weapon, a powerful, devastating weapon that Walter had placed in my hands years ago, and he had trusted me to know when, and if I should ever use it. A part of me, the mother in me, screamed in protest. You can't. You can't throw your own son out of his home. You can't do that to your grandchildren. The thought was monstrous, unthinkable. But then, another voice rose to meet it. A voice that sounded a lot like Walter's. What kind of home is it? Joyce, a home bought with lies. A home where your grandchildren are learning that image is more important than honesty. A home where their father is taught to be silent while his mother is dishonored. Is that the legacy you want to protect? I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the worn leather. This was never about my hurt feelings. It was never about the pie or the party or the cruel words. It was about the foundation, the solid rock that Walter had talked about, and that rock was being eroded, day by day, by a flood of debt and deception and betrayal. If I did nothing, if I let my fear of conflict, my desire to keep a fragile peace, win out, what would happen? They would lose the house anyway, buried under a mountain of debt. My grandchildren would learn that there are no consequences for cruelty. my son would continue to shrink, to become a smaller and smaller version of himself, a ghost in his own life, all to appease a woman who was betraying him with his own worst enemy. My inaction would not be an act of love. It would be an act of cowardice. It would be a betrayal of Walter's foresight, a betrayal of the duty he had entrusted to me. I realized then that I did not have a choice. Not really. I had a responsibility. A strange calm settled over me. The shaking in my hands stopped. The frantic beating of my heart slowed to a steady, resolute rhythm. I was no longer a grieving wife or a wounded mother. I was the trustee, the guardian of a legacy. My feelings were secondary. My duty was primary. I straightened up in the chair. With a deliberate, steady hand, I reached out and closed the heavy, navy blue binder. The cover made a soft, definitive thud as it met the pages within. A sound of finality. A door closing on the past. The game was over. It was time to talk to my son. The unbearable truth. I did not call him right away. I waited a day. I needed the rage to cool, to settle into something harder, something more useful. Rage is a fire that burns out quickly. What I needed was steel. I spent the day gathering my thoughts, printing the necessary documents. Each sheet of paper that came out of the printer felt cold and heavy in my hands. Each one felt like a final nail. The next morning, I called him. My voice was calm, measured. Ryan, I said, I need you to come over. There is something important we need to discuss. There was a pause. I could hear the hesitation, the weariness in his silence. Mom, if this is about the party, it is about more than the party. I said, please, come to the house. Come to your father's study. I hung up before he could argue. The study, that was important. It was the one room in the house that had remained untouched since Walter passed. His law books still lined the shelves. Standing like silent soldiers, his heavy oak desk still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco. It was a room of integrity, a room where truth was respected. It was the only place for this conversation. He arrived an hour later. He looked tired, older than his 35 years. He walked into the study and stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, avoiding my eyes. Okay. Mom, he said, his voice strained. I'm here. What is it? I didn't answer right away. I was sitting in Walter's leather armchair. On the polished surface of the desk in front of me, there were 3 neat stacks of paper. I gestured to the chair opposite me. He hesitated, then sat. The silence in the room was immense. It was filled with the weight of everything unsaid between us for the past 5 years. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed the first folder across the desk toward him. It was a slim folder. It held a single document, a copy of the deed for the house he was living in, the one that was still legally held by the Walter and Joyce Campbell Family Trust. He opened it. He read it. His brow furrowed in confusion. What is this? That is the legal title to your home. I said, my voice even. Your father and I set up a trust. We never transferred the deed into your name. The house, it is still mine? He stared at the paper, then at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, unsettling confusion. He was a man adrift, and I had just told him the ground he was standing on was never really his. I pushed the second folder toward him. This one was thicker. It was filled with the credit card statements, the loan agreements, the past due notices, all of it. The architecture of their financial ruin, laid out in black and white. He opened this one more slowly. His face, which had been pale, began to flush with a dark, painful red. He didn't read every page. He couldn't. He just flipped through them, his breath growing shallow. He saw the numbers, the impossible numbers. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the sight of it was a physical pain. I knew we were stretched thin, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I didn't know it was this bad. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, where did you get this? This is an invasion of our privacy. I looked at him, my son, hiding behind words like privacy because the truth was too unbearable to face. An invasion. Ryan, I said, and my voice was cold now, precise, not a single tremor. An invasion is watching my son stand by while his wife screams at me in front of 20 people. An invasion is knowing your family is drowning and choosing to look away because you are afraid. An invasion is letting your fear turn you into a stranger in your own mother's life. He flinched as if I had slapped him. This, I said, tapping the folder of debt. This is not punishment. This is diagnosis. This is the sickness you have been pretending isn't there. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. I just wanted to make her happy. He mumbled into his palms. I thought if I could just give her what she wanted, everything would be okay. I let him sit with that for a moment. I let the weight of his own words settle on him. Then, I pushed the third folder across the desk. It was the thinnest of all. Just a few printed pages from a calendar. A single photograph. He looked up. His eyes red. He reached for it. His hand shaking. He saw the calendar entries first. Lunch with M.R. M.R. Meeting. He looked confused, and then he saw the photograph. The one I had found online, of Mark Renshaw. The change was terrifying. The color drained from his face completely. The shame, the confusion, it all vanished, replaced by a look of such profound, hollow shock that it stole my breath. He looked at the picture, then back at the calendar initials, M.R. The connection was made. The final, unbearable truth clicked into place. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just made a sound. A low, guttural sound of pure agony, like an animal caught in a trap. He pushed himself away from the desk so violently that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. No, he whispered. No. No. Not him. He stood up and began to pace the small room. His hands tangled in his hair, his body trembling. He was trapped. Trapped in this room, trapped in the ruins of his life. I tried. He choked out, his back to me. God. Mom, I tried so hard. I knew she wasn't happy. I knew we were in trouble. I just kept thinking if I worked harder, if I closed one more deal, I could fix it. I could fix it all. He turned to face me, and the tears were streaming down his face now. Unchecked. The polished architect, the perfect husband, was gone. All that was left was a broken boy. I was a coward, he said. The words torn from him. I knew she was pushing you away. I saw it, and I let it happen, because I was so afraid of her leaving, afraid of everyone seeing that I was a failure, that our perfect life was a lie. I let it happen. I'm sorry. Mom, God, I am so sorry. He finally collapsed back into the chair, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with sobs. I did not go to him. I did not wrap my arms around him. Not yet. This was a pain he had to feel on his own. It was the poison leaving his body. I sat there, in the quiet of my husband's study, and I watched my son break, and I prayed, with all my heart, that this was the kind of breaking that comes before a man puts himself back together again, stronger, and whole. The eye of the storm. He left without another word. The front door clicked shut behind him. A sound so small, so final, and I was alone. The heavy files still lay on Walter's desk. Their work now done. The power had been transferred. The truth, like a lit fuse, was now in my son's hands. All I could do was wait for the explosion. I walked from the study into the kitchen. My body felt strangely light, as if I had just set down a weight I had been carrying for years. But my mind was a hive of activity. 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears. Did I do the right thing? Was this strength? Or was it cruelty? Have I just destroyed my son's life to save it? I made myself a cup of tea, an old habit. Walter used to say I could face down an army with a good cup of Earl Grey. I took it to the kitchen table, the one that overlooks the street. From my window, I can see their house, his house, the house that belonged to the trust. It sat there under the late afternoon sun, looking just as perfect as ever. The roses we planted were still in bloom. The lawn was still impossibly green. A perfect picture. A perfect lie. My hands were wrapped around the warm mug. But I didn't drink. I just sat and listened. It is a strange thing to wait for the sound of a life breaking apart. Every normal neighborhood noise became magnified. A dog barking down the street made me jump. A car backfiring sounded like a gunshot. The hum of my own refrigerator felt deafening in the silence. My house, which had always been a place of comfort, now felt like a waiting room, a hospital waiting room, where you sit under fluorescent lights, waiting for news that you know will change everything. I fought the urge to go over there, to knock on the door, to insert myself into the storm I had created, but I knew I couldn't. This wasn't my fight anymore. This was Ryan's. For years, I had watched him step back, make himself smaller, quiet his own voice to keep the peace. Now, for the first time, he had to find that voice. He had to fight for himself, and he had to do it alone. An hour passed, or maybe it was a lifetime. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor. The tea in my mug grew cold, and then I heard it. It wasn't loud at first, just a raised voice, sharp and high. Lauren's voice. It was muffled by the distance and the closed windows, but the anger in it was clear. It sliced through the quiet afternoon air like a shard of glass. I couldn't make out the words, only the raw, furious sound of them. I closed my eyes. I pictured my grandchildren in their rooms upstairs. Hearing this, my heart ached. Then, another sound, a deeper tone, Ryan's voice. It wasn't shouting, it was firm, steady. The sound of a man who had finally stopped whispering. The sound of a man speaking the truth. The voices went back and forth. A terrible, discordant symphony. And then came a different sound. A crash. It was sharp, violent. The sound of something ceramic shattering against a wall. My entire body tensed. My knuckles were white around my cold teacup. I imagined a plate. A vase. One of the many meaningless, expensive objects Lauren had filled that house with. Something beautiful, broken in an instant. More shouting, louder this time. A desperate, pleading tone from Lauren now. A sound of disbelief. The sound of a queen whose castle walls were crumbling around her. And then, silence. A profound, absolute silence. It was more terrifying than the shouting. The shouting meant the fight was still happening. The silence meant it was over. One way or another, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the house across the street as the sky turned from blue to a bruised purple. The streetlights flickered on. A neighbor walked their dog. Life just kept going. I don't know how long I sat there. The clock on the wall seemed to have stopped. My world had shrunk to that window, to that house, to the silence that hung between us. Finally, I saw movement. The front door of their house opened. A single figure was silhouetted against the light from the hallway. It was Ryan. He stood there for a moment. His shoulders slumped. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that I felt more than heard. Then he started walking, not to his car, but across the street, towards my house, towards me. Each step he took seemed to take an immense effort. He walked like an old man, like a soldier coming home from a long, brutal war. I watched him come up the path, his face pale in the twilight. My own front door opened. He didn't knock. He just walked in and stood there, in my hallway, his car keys dangling from his limp fingers. He looked older, decades older than he had that morning. His eyes were hollowed out, filled with a pain so deep I could barely stand to look at it. He looked at me, sitting at the kitchen table. "It's over," he said. His voice was a rasp, a dry whisper. "It's all over." And in that moment, seeing my son standing there, a broken man at my doorstep, I felt a profound loneliness. If you are still listening to me here, please comment with the word strength below, so I know there are friends walking this path with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell you the final part of this story, the part about how we tried to rebuild a life from the ashes. The shelter. They arrived the next day, not with a moving truck, but with 3 suitcases and 2 bewildered children. My grandchildren, 8-year-old Maya and 6-year-old Leo, stood in my entryway, looking small and lost. Their eyes wide with a confusion they didn't have the words for. Ryan looked like a ghost. He carried the bags inside, set them down in a heap by the stairs, and then just stood there. A ship without a rudder. My quiet, orderly house became a refugee camp overnight. Small plastic dinosaurs appeared on my bookshelves. nestled between volumes of art history. A bright pink backpack was slung over the back of Walter's armchair. The scent of my lavender potpourri was replaced by the smell of bubblegum toothpaste and the faint, heartbreaking scent of children's tears on a pillowcase. The silence I was so used to was shattered by the sound of cartoons on the television and the shuffling footsteps of my son pacing the upstairs hallway late at night. For the first few days, I just managed. I cooked. I cleaned. I read bedtime stories and kissed away nightmares. I was running on autopilot. My own grief and anger packed away in a box to be dealt with later. Ryan was a shadow. He moved through the rooms of his childhood home like a stranger. He ate what I put in front of him without tasting it. He answered his children's questions in monosyllables. He would sit on the edge of his bed and stare at the wall for hours. He was drowning, and he was taking my grandchildren down with him. I saw the fear in Maya's eyes when her father wouldn't look at her. I saw the way little Leo started talking in a whisper, as if a loud noise might break his father completely. I knew I had to do something. My love for him was a deep, powerful ache in my chest. But I knew that simply sheltering him wasn't love. It was enabling. It was letting him hide. On the fourth morning, I found him in the kitchen before the children were awake. He was staring into a cold cup of coffee. His shoulders slumped. The picture of defeat. I poured myself a cup and sat down across from him at the small kitchen table. The same table where he used to do his homework as a boy. Ryan. I began. My voice quiet but firm. We need to talk. He didn't look up. There's nothing to talk about. Oh. I think there is. I said. I waited until he slowly, reluctantly, lifted his eyes to meet mine. I love you. And I love Maya and Leo more than words can say. You are all welcome in this house for as long as you need. But this is my home. It is not a hotel. It is not a place to hide from your life. He flinched. Mom. I'm not. Yes. You are. I interrupted gently. You are. And I won't let you. Not for your sake. And certainly not for theirs. I took a sip of my coffee. So, here is how it is going to be. We will have a schedule. You will get up with the children every morning. You will make their breakfast. You will help them with their schoolwork. At 9 o'clock, you will go into your father's study and you will start making the necessary phone calls to lawyers, to banks. You will begin the hard work of cleaning up this mess. I will take care of the children during that time. But the rest of the day, they are your responsibility. You are their father. They need you, not this ghost you've become. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I think he was expecting sympathy, hugs, tears. He was not expecting a plan. And Ryan, I added, my voice softening just a little. You have to talk to them. You don't have to give them details. But you have to tell them that they are loved, that they are safe, and that their father is here. They are terrified. And your silence is the scariest thing of all. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. A single, jerky motion. A tear rolled down his cheek and fell into his coffee cup. He didn't wipe it away. It wasn't easy. The first few days were awful. The phone calls were excruciating. I could hear his strained, broken voice through the study door. He was short-tempered with the children. The breakfasts were burnt, but he did it. Every single day. He got up. He faced the wreckage. Then, one afternoon, about a week later, I was in the living room, trying to read. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I got up to check on them. The door to Maya's room was slightly ajar. I peered inside. Ryan was sitting on the floor. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a father. He was surrounded by hundreds of tiny, colorful Lego bricks. Maya was next to him, her face a mask of concentration as she studied the instruction booklet. No. Daddy, she said, her little voice full of authority. That piece goes here. See, she pointed a small finger at the diagram. Ryan picked up the tiny brick. His hands, which had seemed so clumsy all week, were gentle now. Careful. He clicked the piece into place. Oh, he said softly. You're right. I see now. Thank you. Sweetie. He wasn't looking at the past. He wasn't looking at the future. For the first time since he had walked through my door, he was simply present. He was there. On the floor. building a ridiculous plastic castle with his daughter. I backed away from the door before they could see me. I went back to my armchair, but I didn't read. I just sat there, and I listened to the quiet murmur of their voices, the gentle click-clack of the Lego bricks. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of something, finally, being built again. The reclaimed canvas. 6 months. It sounds like a long time, but it passes like water flowing over stones, smoothing the sharp edges, but not erasing the shape of what happened. The chaos of those first few weeks in my house eventually settled into a rhythm, a new kind of normal. It was a rhythm of quiet breakfasts, of homework spread across the dining room table, of whispered goodnights through cracked open bedroom doors. It was the rhythm of a family learning how to be a family again. One Tuesday morning, after I had dropped the children off at school and come home to a house that was suddenly, blessedly quiet, I found myself standing in front of the spare room closet. I hadn't opened it in years. My hand hesitated on the old brass knob. Inside were ghosts of a different kind, not of sorrow, but of a life I had packed away. I opened the door, and there they were, my old canvases, smelling of dust and linseed oil, my box of brushes, their bristles stiff with age, my tubes of paint, some of them hardened beyond use. For nearly 40 years, I had been a wife, a mother, a professor. I had forgotten that long before all of that. I was a painter. It felt like uncovering the ruins of an ancient city. A part of myself I thought was lost to time. The next week, I signed up for a watercolor class at the local senior center. It was a humbling experience. My hands, which knew their way around a legal document and a pie crust, felt clumsy and foreign holding a brush. My first few attempts were a mess of muddy colors and uneven washes. But something happened in that brightly lit room. Surrounded by other people with silver hair and patient hands, I started to breathe again, really breathe. I wasn't just Joyce Campbell, the woman whose family had fallen apart. I was just Joyce, a woman learning how to mix cerulean blue with burnt sienna to paint the color of a winter sky, slowly, carefully. I was reclaiming a piece of myself, and as I was finding my own colors again, I watched my son begin to find his. Ryan's healing was not a dramatic, overnight transformation. It was a quiet, painstaking process, like cleaning an old, tarnished piece of silver, rubbing away the dark spots. Little by little, to find the shine underneath, he started seeing a therapist, someone to talk to about the years of quiet compromises that had eroded his sense of self. He learned to talk about his fear, his shame. One evening, he came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up after dinner. He didn't say much at first, just stood there, watching me. Then, he slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a spreadsheet, a budget. It was meticulous, with columns for rent, for groceries, for child support, for paying down the mountain of debt he was now solely responsible for. I found a small apartment, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Closer to the kids' school. It's not much, but it's a start. I looked at the neat columns of numbers. This single piece of paper was more impressive to me than any of the architectural awards he had won. This was the blueprint of a man rebuilding his own life. Brick by responsible brick. I folded the paper and handed it back to him. It's a wonderful start, Ryan, I said. And in that moment, the space between us was not filled with pain or pity. It was filled with a quiet, profound respect. Sometimes, late at night, a morbid curiosity would get the better of me, and I would look at Lauren's social media. The performance continued. There were pictures of her with new friends, at new trendy restaurants, posts about her journey of self-discovery and finding her authentic self. It was all the same language, the same filtered perfection, but something had changed. The comments were fewer, the likes were dwindling, the audience was moving on. It didn't bring me any joy, any sense of victory. It just felt empty, a sad, hollow echo in a digital world. She was still curating a life, and in the process, she seemed to be missing out on living one. This afternoon, I am in my little makeshift studio, the spare room I have finally claimed as my own. The afternoon light is streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On my easel is a new canvas. It's the largest one I've worked on yet. It's a portrait. It's of Ryan and my 2 grandchildren. It's not a perfect, smiling for the camera portrait. It's a moment I captured last week in my living room. My granddaughter is trying to show Ryan something on her tablet. Her face a mask of serious concentration. My grandson is in the middle of a story, his arms waving wildly, a smear of chocolate on his cheek, and Ryan is in the middle, looking from one to the other, a look on his face of pure, chaotic, overwhelming love. He looks a little tired. He looks a little frayed around the edges, but he is completely and utterly present. My brush moves across the canvas, trying to capture not just what I see, but what I feel, the messy, beautiful, imperfect truth of it all. It is not the perfect picture Lauren tried so hard to create. It's something far better. It's real. And as I add a touch of white to capture the light in my son's eyes, I realize something. We are not broken. We are just rearranged. And the picture that is emerging from the reclaimed canvas of our lives is more honest and more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The unwritten future. It has been a year now. A full turning of the seasons. A year of quiet rebuilding. Of learning the difficult grammar of a new life. A year of learning to breathe again. Tonight, I am not in my house, surrounded by the ghosts of what was. I am a guest. I am in my son's home. The word feels right here. It's a small, second-floor apartment in a modest brick building across town. The kind with sensible geraniums in the window boxes. There is no manicured lawn. No cavernous entryway designed to impress. The furniture is a gentle mix of second-hand finds and simple, practical pieces from IKEA that Ryan and I put together one frustrating Saturday. There are small scuff marks on the baseboards from Leo's toy truck. And a colorful, chaotic collage of school art is held to the refrigerator by mismatched magnets. The air smells of spaghetti sauce, a little bit of burnt garlic, and the faint, sweet scent of children's shampoo. It is the most beautiful home I have ever seen. I am sitting on a slightly lumpy sofa, a handmade quilt draped over the back. I am just watching. The light from a simple floor lamp casts a warm, golden glow on the room. Ryan is at the small dining table with Maya. His head is bent over her math homework, his brow furrowed in concentration. His voice is a low, patient murmur as he explains fractions. Using slices of a paper pizza he drew as a visual aid, I watch his hands. The same hands that trembled with such rage and grief in my husband's study. Now, they are steady. They are the hands of a father. Guiding a pencil across a worksheet, Leo is on the rug at my feet, making quiet, roaring sounds as he pushes a small wooden dinosaur around the leg of a coffee table. My dinosaur. It's a little folk art piece Walter and I bought on a trip to North Carolina decades ago. When they moved, it was the one thing Leo had insisted on bringing from my house. He pats it gently. You're safe now. He whispers to the toy. I pretend not to hear, but the words pierce my heart with a sweet, sharp pain. They invited me for dinner, not because it was a holiday or a special occasion, just because it was a Tuesday. Ryan cooked. The spaghetti was a little watery, and the garlic bread was definitely burnt on the edges. We ate on mismatched plates, and Leo spilled his milk, and no one got upset. A paper towel. A calm, oh. Let's get that. And the moment passed. I think about the porcelain that shattered on the floor of that other house, the violence of that sound, and I look at this small, quiet milk spill, and I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. As I sit here, a quiet gratitude settles over me, as soft and warm as the lamplight, and I understand things now, with a clarity that only comes after walking through fire. I watch Ryan praise Maya for finally understanding a difficult problem, and I see the pride in his eyes. It's a pride that has nothing to do with a job title or the car he drives. I used to think a mother's love was a shield, that my job was to be a fortress, standing between my child and the storms of the world. But I was wrong. True love, the deepest kind, is not a shield. It's trusting that your child is strong enough to walk through the storm himself. It's having the courage to let him feel the rain and the wind, and it's standing on the other side. Not to rescue him, but to offer a warm towel and a dry place to rest when he's done. My standing up, finally, was not an act against Lauren. It was an act of faith in Ryan. It was my way of handing my son back his own strength, which he had misplaced for a little while in the pursuit of a life that wasn't his. This small apartment is nothing like the grand, empty house they once lived in. There is no swimming pool, no designer clothes spilling out of the closets, but the laughter here is real. I hear it now, as Leo makes a particularly loud roar and Ryan looks up from the homework, clutching his heart in mock terror, making Maya giggle. I realize the duty of a child is not to build an empire to make their parents proud. The duty of a child is to build a life that is honest, because integrity, that is the only legacy that truly matters. It is the one inheritance my Walter would have cared about. It is the one inheritance you can both receive and pass on, untarnished. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I still think of Lauren, not with anger anymore. The anger has burned itself out, leaving behind only the fine, gray ash of sadness. I see now that she was a prisoner, trapped in a jail of her own making, a jail built from perfect pictures and the empty praise of strangers on the internet. Our family's tragedy, I see now, is a quiet warning. In a world that screams at you to be seen, to be admired, to perform your happiness for an audience. Maybe the most courageous act of all is to simply live a life that needs no audience. To find your value not in the applause, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of an ordinary, truthful day. Even one with burnt garlic bread and spilled milk. Ryan finishes with the homework and walks over. Sitting in the armchair across from me, he looks at me and smiles. A real smile, the kind I remember from his boyhood. A little crooked on one side, the kind that reaches all the way to his eyes. There is no shadow there anymore. There are lines of weariness. Yes, but they are honest lines. He doesn't have to say anything. I don't either. In the quiet space between us, there is a shared understanding of all we have lost, and all that we have, against all odds, managed to find. We both know. I look out the window. The sun has set, painting the last vestiges of the clouds in shades of soft pink and bruised purple. The day is ending. A new one will begin tomorrow. The canvas of my family is no longer perfect. It is filled with scars and marks and places where the paint has been scraped away and laid down again. Thicker this time, with more texture. The underpainting is one of sadness, but it's what gives the new colors their depth. For the first time in a very long time, it is real. And, for the unwritten future, I have learned, real is all you truly need. I used to think that being strong meant carrying everything in silence. I was wrong. True strength is knowing what you must let go of. It's remembering that you are more than the roles you play for others, more than a mother, a wife, a grandmother. You are you, and that is enough. If my story touched you, if you saw a piece of yourself in my struggle, please hold on to this. You are not broken. You are not finished. You are standing on the edge of a new beginning, and you still have time to write your own ending. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you faced a similar crossroad? Comment below. I truly want to hear from you. In the meantime, I'll leave 2 other favorite stories from this channel on the end screen. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for listening to the end.